Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm joined by the wonderful Michael Angarano to talk all about his film Sacramento, in which he plays the character Ricky, as well as being the co-writer and director of the movie. And one of the things I was really interested in terms of how you developed this idea was I heard that you and Christopher Nicholas Smith, who you co-wrote the screenplay with, were kind of driving in the car and seeing the signpost for Sacramento and almost playing a game of chicken, joking like, should we do it? Should we do it? And I was interested in how just that momentary joke in a car really turned into something that you fleshed out into this whole narrative in this film.
Well, you basically answered your own question. That's exactly what happened. We had just worked together. We didn't know each other before we worked together, but we did a pilot together, and we had just heard that it didn't get picked up, so we were unemployed at the time. And we were going to the batting cages, actually. Well, we were actually coming home from the batting cages, and we had nothing else to do for the rest of the day, so we merged onto the freeway, and like all of the signs for the 5 North say, they just said, there was a big sign that said 5 North Sacramento. And so basically the scene that is now in the movie is verbatim what our interaction was, because we would go home and write that scene where one of us was just like, you want to go to Sacramento? Yeah, yeah, fuck it. Let's go to Sacramento. Let's go on a long ass trip to a place I know nothing about and have no desire to be. Basically, verbatim, that scene would become the scene in the film. And over the course of 10 years, yeah, it was like 2017, I think we started writing. We 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 built this story around that concept, that idea. And I say 10 years of writing, but we are both actors, Chris and I. So in the 10 years of writing, I would say that there's like an actual maybe month of dedicated work time. Because Chris and I would hang out for like 5 hours and do nothing, go to the batting cages and watch Mets games, and maybe like 15 minutes of that time we would dedicate to writing. So like we eventually piecemealed this script together, but we really did focus on it for a really long period of time, where I think we wrote dozens of drafts of this script. And every different iteration, every different reason why two guys would go to Sacramento, we basically put into script form. We even had changes in tone at one point. We really just kind of explored. And as we matured and evolved as guys and as artists, and really what once we kind of were cutting into this like big hunk of marble of this original idea, we realized what it was and what it was like, what it was needing. And so the main themes were always there. It was always about at the core of all of our ideas and themes, it was always about male communication and these guys needing each other. Like, why do they need each other? What is at the core of that premise? And so it really developed from there. And then as the story evolved and became more clear to us, we were able to refine the story more and more.
Also, with what you were describing there about even just playing around with tone or different scenarios and scenes, I heard that the two of you would sometimes improv by yourselves out a scene and send it as a voice note back and forth to each other to kind of figure it out and flesh it out. And how did that really help you in landing on this specific tone and the voice of the film that you've ultimately ended up with?
Totally. Well, like I said, we were both actors. We are both actors. And so dialogue comes very naturally to us. I would say like dialogue comes way easier to us than, or to me anyway. Chris, I think is a little better at structure, but dialogue comes way easier than structure. So I actually, if I write anything, I always have to think of it in terms of dialogue. Like if I write an outline for something, it's I can almost never write like a person walks into a room and has a glass of water and leaves the room. I have to write, I'm thirsty, I'm gonna go get myself. I have to write it out in dialogue, for better or for worse. So um I have dozens and hundreds, I think, of voice notes, and over the years of just so many different scenes that we would riff on and kind of go back and forth. And even when we were shooting something even when we were shooting, Chris would come up to me and say, "Hey, like, do you remember that time we were like joking about like what Ricky would do in this situation?" And a lot of like little things, not so much dialogue, but a lot of little behavioral tics of Ricky's and Glenn's and the other characters too were born out of these like little riff jokey skits that we would do over the course of the 10 years.
And with your character Ricky as well, there's this way in which he really wants to be able to present everything's great and things are going wonderfully and isn't everything fantastic? But it's really this mask for so much that's underneath the surface, him kind of not having fully dealt with his father's passing and having, stepped away from the idea of this relationship. And so when you were developing that character, how did you find the dichotomy of how he's presenting on the outside versus what it's actually masking on the inside?
Yeah, I think they kind of Ricky and Glenn mirror each other. I think they both think they're dealing with their stuff appropriately, and to some degree they are, but they're both not. Ricky is always like archetype wise has always been that friend who is just like stuck in high school, stuck in college, stuck. And they're at the point now where at one point that was fine. In your 20s, everybody kind of goes through that. But when you're in your 30s and, life goes on and it's kind of sad to be that person who's so stuck in, you know, the idea of being 18 or 19. And um, that archetype wise was always who Ricky was. But I think somewhere in our development of the script, I think we had always written it through Ricky's perspective, which was idolizing Glenn as this guy who has it all together. And and that changed that the this the it switched at one point in our writing process. And once that switch was made where we realized that Glenn maybe didn't have it all together. Maybe he actually isn't who Ricky thinks he is, and maybe he's not who he thinks he is. That is where the script and the story and the characters really started clicking. Um, because it was just funny to us. What if Ricky actually has it more together than Glenn does? That became really funny. That idea, that concept of like, oh, maybe he actually, even though he is stuck in this arrested development, maybe he's actually the one, putting more time and effort into his growth. Maybe, and once that idea started materializing, that's when the script really started to sing.
Because you have Ricky is this character who's dealing with all of these things, but he is trying to find a way through it. He is in this support group, although he very much thinks that he should be the one running it and is kind of
Yeah,
taking charge
yeah.
of it all at the same time. So it's both a way of him dealing with it, but also creating this bubble for himself so that he doesn't have to deal with it in the outside world. And how did you find those juxtapositions of someone who wants to work through things and is actually making an effort, but also is his own worst enemy some of the time as well?
Well, it's like, you take one step forward and you take one step back. And as this and I think especially when you are, when Ricky and Glenn are together, they revert back to who they are, what their relationship was when they were, kids or, teenagers or in their early 20s. So it's like they treat each other the worst, like they take it out on each other the worst. Like the way Glenn treats Ricky's also like really shitty and poor, and the way Ricky treats Glenn, like they're really, um neither of them have good sense of boundaries, and neither of them have a good sense of respect for one another. I think they take each other for granted in so many ways because there's just like so, as with friends of, have been friends for their whole lives, there's just like so much history and shit that they both have. And so there's that, and there's the idea that, yeah, like ideally, conceptually, intellectually, Ricky is making good headway, but when it comes down to it, he's actually really, he's really not doing anything. It's sort of like he's playing tennis against the drapes a little bit, So that's also the conceit. Like he needs to put this stuff into action.
And with that idea as well, that Ricky, sorry, Glenn, Michael Cera's character, doesn't have it together as much as the outside world might think for the two of them. I love kind of the comedic details of how his anxiety presents. We meet him kind of mock playing peekaboo with his child who isn't born yet, and then realizing the crib shaking and breaking it, or holding a plate that physically gets smashed within his hands without him even dropping it. How did you land upon the way in which you felt like that was going to present itself in this character?
Um, yeah, I think that was a little bit more of an inside out approach where we were trying to think of ways to show Glenn's anxiety from the start. And we reverse engineered that, I think, a little bit. And we wanted to demonstrate right off the bat that something was afoot in the world of Glenn, and and we really wanted to demonstrate how he presents himself to Rosie, his wife, played by Kristen, is different than the what's actually happening in his mind. So what we see as the audience is we see firsthand that something is going on with him that he's not acknowledging. And I think really over the course of the story, Glenn catches up to the audience in that respect because Glenn, it takes a whole story and a whole film for him to realize that like he's in dire need of something. And so that was a little bit of a reverse engineering where once we realized end result, end game, where we wanted Glenn to go, where his journey was sort of heading, we needed to then go back and like walk the audience through what this guy's emotional state is, because really the whole script kind of operates under a veiled narrative, so to speak, where even with Ricky there's veiled intention, with Glenn there's veiled emotion. So it was always a dialogue between Chris and I, like how much do we want the audience to know and when. And we realized once we wanted Glenn to go where he goes, we needed to show it early, as soon as possible, or else
And
it won't really track.
yeah, yeah, no, you're totally right with that. And thinking to what you were just describing about some of the cycles from their childhood, even just the way that we first see the two of them on screen together is Ricky physically hiding in a tree
Right.
and then jumping out, to kind of make his friend laugh. It's very like kind of
Yeah.
pure childlike in that moment. And meanwhile, you have Glenn going, "Wait, I don't want to see him," and he's just trying to hide inside of his house.
Yeah.
How did you want that scene to just really set up that idea of like these are two grown men, but they're also, because they have that history with each other, you do also get to see those sides of them as well.
Yeah, we just wanted to show that once these guys are together, they immediately revert back to who they are when they're together. And that's a dynamic that has been there for a long, long time. And I think part of the reason why Glenn is avoiding Ricky is because he knows he doesn't have it. He doesn't have the self-control or the willpower or um really the desire to be that person anymore. I think he likes his life. He likes being in control. He likes the things the way they are. He likes safety. He doesn't want to have a tequila shot at 11 a.m. on a Saturday anymore. He likes the person he is. He's done enough to know that like he's comfortable here. And this agent of chaos that his friend is, he doesn't really want to go there anymore. So I think that's some of the shedding. But of course, he doesn't articulate that. He doesn't say that. He doesn't have the language and the skills to articulate that in like a respectful way to make it an interesting conversation between him and Ricky. I feel like, the movie would be much different if Glenn was actually as evolved as he thinks he is. I think it would be a completely different dynamic.
It would be. And I also love the way that it plays out in the scene where they get the chance to kind of go and play in a gym after hours and step into a boxing ring and kind of wrestle fight with each other. And it's so great because neither of them are trying to really kind of take the other one down. And it really is just, again, just this pure childlike joy that you see in acting in the two
Yeah.
of them. And I love the way that you directed that scene as well. And even just like the way that the editing is kind of pacing it out differently. How did you kind of set up the choices of what you wanted that moment to be?
Well, it's a really important moment in the story because it's the first time you really see Glenn and Ricky in their natural element, and having fun together. And so I think the audience really needs it. It was actually fun to see that the way that kind of evolved and developed over time was really interesting because at one point in the edit, as everybody does, like we were having pacing issues, and I actually thought at one point of cutting that scene, and which is crazy to even think of because I was like, it's so different than everything else, and it is a little bit of an exaggerated moment where the lighting goes down and everything about it. I just was watching it with tunnel vision, and I was really thinking of it in terms of story, like, okay, point A to point B, like, do we need this moment? Do you need this? I was just trying to like trim fat. And I thought, yeah, maybe we just skip that moment. Maybe like it's a funnier beat if we get rid of that whole gym sequence. And when you watch it with tunnel vision, you kind of lose a lot of perspective. And so we had our first like relatively large note screening and watched it with an audience in a theater, which was petrifying. You could basically hear like actors fart on camera. It's not sound mixed, it's not colored. The movie is like it is so rough, and that was really scary to watch. But that moment played in a way that I was like, oh my God, this is so necessary, and it's also the turning point, I feel like, tonally, of the film, because we've been working to get to this point. We've been working as an audience to understand, like, why are these guys friends? Like, and are these guys friends? Like, do they actually like each other? Like, does Glenn actually even like Ricky? And so seeing that moment of maybe just for a second, you know, reality taking a bench seat, these guys like imaginations taking home hold. We see their relationship as they used to see it, and two boys like wrestling in their parents' bedrooms. It's sort of like that's really that heart and soul of Ricky and Glenn's relationship. So all the choices were born out of that.
Yeah. I also feel like they both have these relationships that are in very different places, but there is this parallel element where, Rosie Kristen Stewart's character and Tally Maya Erskine's character both essentially are saying to the other guy, I don't have the bandwidth and the space to take care of what you need right now. Like, you
Yeah.
need to take care of yourself. And I was interested in kind of how you found that parallel within those two relationships, even though they're very different to each other.
They're very different to each other, and they're in very different stages of relationship. One's a non-relationship, the other is two people who are like recently married and having a child together, and have a house together, and they're starting their family. It Because the real estate in the story is dedicated so much to the guys, we really wanted to, as much as we can with Rosie and Tally, we wanted to show that these characters are like, fully fleshed out, three-dimensional, and flawed characters in and of themselves. And like why each of these women would choose to be with these guys is another story. And we wanted to show that, like, they are not, these guys are presenting differently, but they're also, what their relationships are and their own personal growth are two different things. And I think you can see with these women that their personal growth and their personal stories are also different than their relationships with these guys. Like, their relationships with these men don't define who these women are. And I wanted we wanted to show that as much as possible that like, hey man, you do you. Whatever you need to do, I'm gonna be over here doing this. If you need that, that's cool, but I'll be over here. That's kind of at the core of their relationship. So we really just in talks with Kristen and Maya, we wanted to, their own inner lives with these guys were with these female characters were really important, and what they each brought to the characters like really made it feel so feel so lived in and grounded at the same time, because in a lesser version with lesser care, I think, they could be they could just not feel as lived in as these other characters. And so testament to them, Maya and Kristen.
And also in talking a little bit about some of the elements that came together and how you directed this film, there's really a lot of utilization of shooting outdoors and using natural light. And then obviously you have the added element of there is the road trip part of it, and you have this really wonderful vintage car. But I also love how that allows us to kind of really see the characters as they're moving through these scenes.
Mm.
It doesn't feel closed in with the two of them. And so how did you go into just figuring out all of the logistics and all of the elements and all of the shot listing that was going to go into that? Because the camera is never static. It feels like it's always moving with the story.
Yeah, it is always moving. And as many locations as there are, like I don't think we ever had a location move within the day. Which from a production standpoint, I think saved our movie. Like there were days where we would wrap early and I would be freaking out. As like we would work less than a 12-hour day, and I was like, are we sure? Like, did we get everything? Like, can I see the list again? Um, we just had a great crew in LA who were really on the same page. When I was meeting with sound mixers, we had a great sound mixer, Richard Novick, and he's like such a pro. And he was the first guy who, when I was talking to him beforehand, I was like, hey, by the way, the car is a convertible, right? And he was like, yeah, it should be. And I was like, that's it. That's the guy. Because other guys who I interviewed were like, you might want to consider having an enclosed car. You have a lot of, you're just going to be ADRing it. He's like, no, we'll mic it up. We'll mic that thing up. You guys will be fine. I see no reason why it shouldn't be a convertible. That car, that Chrysler LeBaron, was written into the script because that is my friend's car. And I'll tell you a funny story. The idea is that we kind of want to show that more or less Ricky might be living out of his car, that everything that he owns is in this car, so to speak. um and so it was really important to us, like, what exactly is in this car, how do we show that? And on day one of filming, we had like just gotten the car, they had just cleaned it, they hadn't opened it up yet, so set dressing had all their stuff on the table. And all of Ricky's stuff, all of his belongings, all of props, all of set dress. So we had everything splayed out. They finally opened the trunk. I look at it, I'm like, don't touch it. It's perfect. My friend's car was basically like exactly how I imagined it in the script, where it was like the most random things, from like a mask to tennis balls, and I think there was a BB gun in there which we had to take out. But all of these things were in there. I just wanted to make it feel lived in and real, and that this car had been around for a really long time. And right now, I think that car is in a storage space in like Long Beach somewhere. Um, but yeah, all of these natural elements and all of these choices were things that we wrote into the script from day one. And also, it was really important. There was a version of this production years ago that we were shooting in Georgia, and which I wasn't totally surprised by, but I was like, well, then maybe we should just change it to, change the name of the movie to like Athens or Savannah or something. Like the texture of Southern California really lends itself to the film. And I don't think we should try and, wherever we get to shoot it, I don't think we should try and fake it. I think it should just feel, wherever we are, we should feel that place. And so, yeah, I was really happy that when we were able to shoot this film, we shot it exclusively in California, in Los Angeles and Sacramento. And especially now after these fires, it feels like a true gift to be able to have shot here. Um, and you know, there were so many visual references that we had for for the road trip and for a lot of these scenes, a lot of films that we were kind of standing on the shoulders of, wanting to, emulate and also add on to, so to speak.
It's great. And I think it's just, all of those details that are testament to making sure that you were telling this story in the way that you wanted to as a filmmaker. So congratulations on the movie. Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.